The letter came on a Tuesday, not a Friday when you could at least fall apart over a weekend, a Tuesday, like the IRS specifically chose the most colorless day of the week to tell Eleanor Vance that she owed $214,000 in back taxes on a business she didn't know existed. Her husband Gerald had been dead for 11 months. She told me she just stood at the mailbox, didn't go inside, just stood there in her housecoat with the letter getting soft in her hands from the rain. Neighbors drove past. She didn't move, because somewhere in her brain something was trying to reconcile two facts that could not live in the same room together. That Gerald had handled everything, and that Gerald had apparently handled nothing. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the wife who trusted. The IRS doesn't care that you didn't sign it, doesn't care that you were in the kitchen, doesn't care that you thought joint filing just meant you were on the same team. You signed the return. Your name is on the document. That's all they need. That is legally all they need. 41 years of marriage, 4 houses, 3 kids, and Eleanor didn't know the name of their accountant. She thought that was love. She thought that was partnership, letting him carry the weight, staying in her lane. Every financial advisor she ever half listened to at a dinner party said the same thing. Divide and conquer. Play to your strengths. Trust the process. The process had a lien on her childhood home. This isn't a story about a bad husband. I want to be careful here because it's more dangerous than that. This is a story about a system, a whole cultural architecture that told women like Eleanor that not knowing was a form of grace, that asking questions was distrust, that the good wife keeps the home and lets him keep the books. And then he died, and she found out the books were a crime scene. Those glassing eyes, she'd bought them at a Walgreens checkout line. Gerald had laughed. $4, Ellie? Really? She wore them every Tuesday when he left for the bank, reading her garden catalogs, not asking, never asking. Every Tuesday, 2 p.m., the kiss landed just above her left eyebrow, warm, deliberate. For our sunset years, he'd say, lifting the keys off the hook like a small private ceremony. She found that ritual beautiful once, proof of a man who planned, who carried things so she didn't have to. He died on a Tuesday. Chicken marsala, good wine. He was mid-sentence, something about the gutters, and then he simply wasn't there anymore. Gone before the ambulance, gone before she could ask a single question. Her first coherent thought, God help her, wasn't "I love you." It was, "I don't know where those keys are." She found the keys in his winter coat, left breast pocket, right next to a receipt she didn't look at yet. Couldn't, not then. Box 847. Marcus Thorne had the kind of face that delivered bad news for a living. No theater, no softening. He simply lifted the lid and stepped back. Professional distance, like a coroner giving the family room. There was no gold, no annuity paperwork, no treasury bonds, no sunset. 14 credit cards, every one of them maxed out, every one of them bearing Eleanor's signature, except Eleanor had never signed them. A second property in Clearwater, Florida, a condo she'd never visited, never decorated, never breathed air on this earth. Marcus said something. She couldn't hear it. She was looking at the receipt from his coat, a restaurant in Clearwater, table for two, dated the Tuesday before he died. Table for two. Eleanor kept thinking about that phrase driving home. Who sits across from someone at a table for two and builds a parallel life between the breadsticks? Martha Kowalski knew. Eleanor had forgotten until now, deliberately maybe. Martha, who used to bring lemon cake to every block party. Martha, whose husband Boyd ran the family trust from the dining room table like it was a board meeting and a birthday dinner simultaneously. Sign here, sweetheart, pass the salt. Nobody questioned Boyd. Questioning Boyd meant you didn't understand love. Boyd died. The trust dissolved into something that looked legally like vapor. Martha is 71 now. She works the 11 p.m. shift at a Gulf station off Route 9, compression socks, orthopedic shoes, a Ph.D. in art history framed somewhere in a storage unit. She told Eleanor once, flat and without self-pity, "Trust is a luxury the vulnerable cannot afford." Eleanor had laughed then, politely, uncomfortably. She wasn't laughing now. She couldn't afford trust. Eleanor understood that now, sitting at the kitchen table with Martha's words still ringing and a manila folder full of evidence that would end Sloane's world if she opened it. Sloane found her crying over it anyway. The folder, the cards, the Clearwater photos spread like a hand of cards nobody wanted to win. Sloane stood in the doorway, Gerald's jawline, Gerald's eyes, and something in her face didn't soften, it calcified. Gerald worked himself to death for you. Flat, surgical. You're looking for someone to blame because you're scared of being poor. Eleanor tried to show her the receipt, table for two, Clearwater, the Tuesday before. Sloane left without touching it. That's the part nobody warned you about. The debt you can fight. The IRS has a process, paperwork, and appeals system. Your daughter's grief has no filing procedure. Eleanor sat alone in the fluorescent kitchen, the only person on earth who'd seen the monster, and the monster wore her husband's face. No filing procedure, Eleanor had learned. What existed, instead, was a conference room on the 14th floor, a pitcher of water nobody touched, and a lawyer named Bradford Hess whose suit cost more than Martha's monthly rent. He had Gerald's same energy, that particular brand of masculine patience that is actually contempt on a dimmer switch. Mrs. Vance, he let her name sit there. You drove the Mercedes, wore the pearls, lived in 4,000 square feet. A pause, deliberate as a scalpel. Did you think the money grew in the garden? The room expected her to fold. She could feel it. The court reporter, the paralegal, even Marcus, bracing. Eleanor set down her water glass. I didn't choose to be a partner, she said. Quiet, absolute. I was coached to be a spectator. Spectators don't sign contracts. Bradford blinked, once. For the first time in 11 months, longer, honestly, much longer, Eleanor felt something shift behind her sternum. Not victory, not yet. Something smaller but more durable than victory. Clarity. Clarity. Eleanor was still turning that word over when Marcus slid a manila envelope across the table after the deposition. You're not the first, he said. Not unkindly, the way a doctor says you're not alone in this before the diagnosis gets worse. Sarah O'Coffer was 29 when she delivered her son at St. Vincent's. 11 hours of labor, epidural that came too late. Her husband Desmond was in the waiting room the entire time, thoughtful, terrified, texting updates to both families. He was also on the phone with a loan officer. Desmond used Sarah's Social Security number to secure a $340,000 business line of credit, while she was dilated to 8 centimeters. The loan funded a warehouse. The warehouse funded a lifestyle Sarah never saw. By the time their son said his first word, the debt was delinquent. Sarah's credit, Sarah's number, Sarah's name. Desmond called it a miscommunication. Here's what Marcus told Eleanor, flat as a courtroom floor. Coerced debt isn't careless. It isn't impulsive. It requires your information, your signature, your identity, harvested deliberately at the moment you are most distracted by love. That's not a mistake. That's a premeditated strike. Premeditated. Eleanor couldn't unhear that word. It followed her home, into the house she'd lived in for 33 years, the one with the hydrangeas Gerald had planted the summer Sloane was born, the kitchen window she'd stood at 10,000 Tuesday mornings watching him back out of the driveway. Marcus called at 7 a.m. That's how she knew. Good news comes at reasonable hours. Catastrophe doesn't wait for coffee. There's a second mortgage, Eleanor. His voice had that coroner quality again, precise, evacuated of emotion. Filed 3 years ago. The signature is yours, except it isn't. The house, the actual house, the hydrangeas and the kitchen window, and the 4 walls that were supposed to be the one thing nobody could touch, already gone. Sold 3 years ago to fund a shell company that dissolved 8 months later into pure paperwork vapor. Gerald had kissed her forehead every Tuesday. For our sunset years, he'd say. The sunset years were a company called Vance Meridian LLC, with no employees, no revenue, no assets, just Eleanor's forged signature holding the whole fiction upright like a single load-bearing wall. She sat on the kitchen floor, cold tile, didn't move for a long time. The house was the bank's. Had been for 3 years. She'd just been living in it.
She'd just been living in it. 3 years. Watering his hydrangeas, preserving his legacy, heating his house. That thought drove her to Clearwater on a Thursday with no plan and Marcus's address printout folded in her coat pocket. Not the restaurant. The office. Gerald Vance LLC had operated, if you could call it that, from a strip mall between a nail salon and a shuttered Subway. The lock took 1 credit card and 0 resistance. Inside smelled like mildew and abandoned ambition, filing cabinets, a dead ficus, and on the desk, Gerald's handwriting in 4 composition notebooks, the same ones he'd used since college. She read standing up, couldn't sit. He wasn't a criminal architect. That almost made it worse. Gerald was a frightened, proud, quietly drowning man who couldn't say, "I'm failing," to a single living soul. So instead, he said it to Eleanor's credit score, to Eleanor's signature, to Eleanor's name on documents she'd never seen. Every journal entry another small cowardice dressed as protection. She burned them in the parking lot. No ceremony, no tears. A gas station lighter and a metal trash can. The legacy was smoke. She watched it go and felt, not relief, not grief, something colder and more permanent. Done. Smoke and cold permanence. Eleanor carried that smoke and cold permanence into the arbitration room 6 weeks later. No pearls, no Mercedes energy. Just a woman with an accordion folder and Marcus beside her like a quiet second. She didn't plead. That was the thing Bradford Hess hadn't calculated. Mercy requires you to feel small. Eleanor had burned the last thing that made her feel small in a Clearwater parking lot. She presented the pattern: 14 cards, the forged mortgage, the journals photographed before the fire because Marcus had insisted, Sarah O'Coffer's case as precedent, the Tuesday ritual reframed not as devotion but deliberate information control. Nullification of identity. The arbitrator used the phrase like it was routine. For Eleanor, it was resurrection. She got the house, the hydrangeas, the kitchen window. Sloane stopped returning calls the same afternoon. Her text arrived at 6 p.m. 11 words. "You destroyed him to save a building. I hope it was worth it." Eleanor read it once, set the phone face down on the kitchen counter, stood at the window a long time watching the hydrangeas. Gerald's hydrangeas, her hydrangeas now, complicated and still blooming regardless. Some winds arrive already grieving. Still blooming regardless. Eleanor thought about that the morning she drove to the DMV, the hydrangeas surviving without permission, without anyone managing them, just root and water and stubbornness. The DMV smelled like fluorescent light and stale coffee, numbered tickets, plastic chairs bolted to each other like they'd tried to escape once. Her number was called at 11:23 a.m. The clerk was young, tired, working through a Tuesday like it was any Tuesday. Reason for name change? 41 years of answers collapsed into 6 seconds of silence. Eleanor thought about the pearls, the forged signature, the journals burning in a strip mall parking lot, Martha in compression socks at a Gulf station, Sarah in a hospital bed dilated to 8 while her identity was harvested in the waiting room. She looked the clerk dead level. "I'm reclaiming a stolen asset, myself." The clerk typed it without blinking, stamped the form, slid it across the laminate counter like it was nothing, which is exactly how the most important transactions should feel: quiet, clean, irrevocable. Eleanor Vance walked out into the parking lot, a different name in the same body, and for the first time in 41 years, nobody was kissing her forehead and telling her not to worry. She wasn't worried.